All right. Well, welcome everybody to this month's edition to Estimating Life. Today we've got Andy Leek with us. Andy, if you don't know Andy is one of those really visionary people that kind of has a big picture in mind, and he's making it happen. He's with PARIC, and one of the things that I think we could do today is take our estimating discussion kind of up a little bit and talk a little bit higher level than we normally do around kind of where things are at and where they're going. But also, we've got some questions that a lot of our clients and potential clients, people who are interested in estimating, are interested in see if they get answered by a guy like Andy. So hopefully, no pressure, Andy, but I think you'll do fantastic. Anyway, maybe before we get into the questions, though, what we could do is start with our talking about our jaunt over to Vegas, where we attended AU this year. A lot of cool stuff going on. I, unfortunately, was knee-deep in meetings and doing a class with Andy, actually, where we presented a little bit on 3D quantity takeoff. But I think Andy was able to get out a little bit more. He was one of the keynote speakers, so he's kind of a big deal if you didn't get a chance to see him. But yeah, so Andy, hey man, if we could just tee it off a little bit, tell us about your perspective of what you saw at AU, anything that you learned, anything you thought was promising.
It was a great AU. They are always a really good event to go to. I was kind of like you. I was running from meeting to meeting and from class to class, but I did manage to have some really good takeaways. I think the industry has evolved a lot over the last 5 or 10 years, really. I think this year was one of the first times you could really get a sense that the concept of integrating technologies together was really taking hold. And you're seeing a lot of different technology partners working together and working with their clients. And I think that was a really positive thing that I picked up on. I think that you're starting to see that people are really starting to want to leverage more of their data. They're starting to realize how much data we actually have from all these cloud-based systems now. And how can we start to use it in a way that's beyond just doing checklists and document management and BIM coordination? So there's a lot of that, I think, and looking at how we can start to use dashboards and BI is something that is really going to be center stage for the next few years, I think. And then you mentioned our class. Something I thought was kind of cool about the class, we had a little fun with that. I think we tried to keep it high level and a little lighthearted. But it was amazing to see by a raise of hands how many people in the room were already using 3D for quantity takeoff. And it was almost the entire room, and it was a couple hundred people in there. That was pretty awesome. I mean, I don't know why that was such a surprise to me, but it did come across as, wow, this is kind of a milestone that we've got to this point where it's no longer 5 years down the road. It's something that's truly happening by more and more people.
Yeah, I agree. I was pretty shocked myself. I sort of assumed that a lot of the people that would attend that class were people who kind of were like, well, I like the idea, but I still think it's a little bit bunk. But let's see where the state of it is, and maybe next year we'll try it. But it turned out that the people that were in that class were actually people who were doing it, and everybody's sort of like trying to stumble through it a little bit. But we had some people in that class that were doing it pretty well. So it was really promising. I agree. I think my perspective is that it's starting to, the wheels are starting to actually touch the ground a little bit, and we're actually starting to get some traction with all this techie business as it pertains to estimating. Everybody saw it, kind of the early warnings of the tsunami coming. DC started getting on the scene, and it started to become a really big thing. And now pretty much every company has got some sort of VDC, VBG group, and now that wave is starting to hit pretty hard on estimating, and those teams are aligning. And I'm with you, man. It was really promising to see kind of where that was all going.
Yeah, the foundation is definitely set for us to really start making big strides over the next couple of years. And we've gotten to that point on the adoption curve where it's no longer so far out. And I think that the fear is starting to go away of, it's kind of this scary thing. And don't get me wrong, it's not perfect. We all understand. I think that's part of the industry is coming to terms that it's not perfect yet. But what could you use it for? And if you don't start with something today, you're never going to get to doing all of it, or even most of it. And I don't know that we're in the next few years we're going to get to where we can do it all with 3D. I don't think that's likely. And there's always the intangible things that just need to be quantified in 2D, or what I kind of term 1D, where it's just, hey, we need to get permits. There's no drawing for this. I just need permits, and that costs money. But if you don't start making strides at some point, you're never going to get there. So I think it was, again, encouraging just to see people really starting to move down that road and ask great questions. I mean, there were great questions asked in that class. What could you really use in the model? What was the scopes that really made sense to try and quantify? And starting with things that are a little easier, and then getting into more complicated things. And we're focused on architectural at the moment, so architectural and structural. So what parts of that model can you use? And people started asking great questions about, well, how do you know it's modeled right, and what can you use, and when can you use it? And really, those are all great questions to be asking.
Well, that's actually a really good segue, man. So one of the questions, by happenstance, actually was along that line. So it talked about kind of what scopes do you guys have success in pulling from the model? So when you do get a model, like you said, some things work, some things don't necessarily work today. But what scopes have you guys been able to successfully use when it comes to 3D quantity takeoff?
Yeah, for us, it's still early days, and it kind of depends on the product type and where we're at in that design development process. It's obviously a very iterative process. Footings and foundations are a great place to start. They're pretty straightforward. I like to, kind of summarize it really quick and say, doors, floors, walls, windows are all things that you can quantify. But with a little asterisk, when it comes to walls in particular, you really need to understand what you're quantifying. Are you just quantifying framing, and is it modeled correctly? Or are you quantifying drywall, and you need to take a little different look at that? The way that we quantify that is probably a little unique. I'm sure that there are other folks in the industry who do it, but we want to look at your base drywall and then your top out drywall. And so models aren't typically built that way, and so you have to do a little voodoo magic to make all that work the way that you want it to exactly. Or and I think we're going to get to this, but working with the design teams to make sure that they model it in a way that we can do it, or we may have to make a copy of the model and divvy it up a little bit differently for our own purposes.
Well, let's dive into that then. I think that's a good point. So one of the questions, and this is a long question, but it was, how are you working with design firms to input the data that's most beneficial for QTO, and know that they're building the BIM accurately represent construction?
Ooh, that's a great question.
It's a tough one, yeah.
Well, it's actually a really good question. And it all depends, right? It depends on the type of product that we're working on. It depends on where we're at in the development process. You can only rely on the model for certain things throughout that iterative process. So early on, we may just get floor area and doors and windows and maybe some furniture or millwork or something like that. I know we can get like parking and some site paving things like that. But the way that we work with them is, like most firms that are doing BIM, we create a BIM execution plan and try to set expectations and manage them through that document so that everybody kind of has an understanding of, what's expected for BIM coordination for MEPs, and now what's expected for quantification. Because for us, it's not just the QTO, it's also the change management piece. And so, as it's no secret that I'm a big proponent of BIM 360 and the integrated approach. And this is where the power of DESTINI and the Estimator platform together with BIM 360 brings a lot of value, because you've got that model viewer all nested inside there. And that allows us to do change management. So we can see from one model to the next what changed. And we're not going to quantify everything, at least not today from the model, but the big ticket items that we can kind of run through them really fast. If we know that in our BPEP we've specified, hey, we need ceilings and we need walls, and they need to be the right size with the right number of layers, and we don't get too crazy yet, and we're just kind of keeping it high level where it's something that everybody can consume and everybody's comfortable doing it. We don't want to take people too far out of their comfort zone in terms of completely re-engineering the design process. So for today, what can we get out of the model that's painless? If there's some obvious things that are way offline, then we'll work on that. But we've been pretty fortunate that most of the designers we're working with are using BIM, more or less doing good modeling. It's not perfect, but then again is where you got to stand back and look at it and say, based on what we asked for, did we more or less get what we wanted, and can we make it work?
So is that the tactic then? So for those people out there who don't have a BIM execution plan just yet, they're not integrating the estimators with that. Would that be your recommended kind of first step for those guys? Is when they're trying to reach out the designer, you have a unique perspective, kind of working in an integrated environment for so long. And let's say it's the first time that a particular architect is going to work with you. Kind of how would you broach that? Is that an easy conversation to say, hey, we want to include this scope in the BIM execution plan, or are they a little bit prickly on that?
Well, I'm sure you can tell by my Cheshire grin that it always depends. I think that has to go actually in our BIM execution plan. At some point, I'm going to write depends on these variables. Mm. In all honesty, and with all joking aside, every firm is a little different. The way that they approach modeling and the things that they're comfortable in terms of kind of saying, yes, we stand behind this. The construction documents at the end of the day are still what we have to live and breathe. But in general terms, because we're managing a process and the industry is starting to come around to the realities of what that means, and it's not as big and scary. Not to say that there's not some risk there that has to be managed appropriately. But if we're all being diligent and we're all being responsible in the things that we're modeling, that conversation is becoming easier and easier. One of the things that we've done is we openly share most of our stuff. And it's kind of counterintuitive, but we share everything that we can because we figure we don't know everything, and the industry's evolving and we're still learning. So we share our BIM execution plan with everybody. Here's how we do it. Here's what we're looking for. Feel free to beat it up. If you see things in here that you're not comfortable with, let us know. But it covers the gamut. It's not just the BIM process. It's what version of design software are you using? How are you going to do your updates? Are you going to keep your models up to date throughout the process? This new cloud-based world that we're living in requires that we're always more or less on the latest version, and getting the infrastructure, the IT support groups behind that comfortable with updating and making sure all their families are going to stand up and work correctly and not have some negative implications on their construction documents. Those are all real concerns, and we acknowledge that, and we work with the design teams to kind of get through that process as evenly as possible. But it always depends. So I think the biggest thing there is communicating, sharing your expectations so you can manage them and make everyone comfortable with that process to the degree that you can. Without struggle, there is no process. But we try to minimize the struggle part.
Well, that's actually really amazing. Kind of what you said. Just kind of dialing it back just a second. What I heard is that the secret to a lot of that is transparency, and I think that's a pretty powerful thing that you guys do, where you're willing just to say, hey, we're just gonna open the whole thing up to you, and anybody can take a look at this, and we'll share it with anybody. I know that you and PARIC are part of kind of a peer group, and you guys share notes, compare notes with other companies, maybe some that you even compete with. And I think, to me, that's a really awesome thing that you do, just around collaboration and transparency. Man, that is huge. One thing I in listening to all this, and there's actually one of the questions that we have, but it does kind of beg the question. It's a lot of work that you're doing now that you didn't have to do before, where you're having to go off and talk with the architects and work with these people and bring all these additional technologies and do stuff that you didn't have to do before. So I guess the obvious question is is it worth it? What's the advantage of 3D estimating, and what makes it better than taking off flat estimating data? Like, why go through the hassle?
So my obvious disclaimer: it depends. I think the advantage of it is a handful of things. So I mentioned change management. I refer to that as kind of the Where's Waldo effect. Whenever you get a new set of drawings, that you have to, parse through all those drawings and try and figure out what changed. And unless there's some sort of an email that says, hey, we changed these things, you're kind of just left to figure it out. And in the high speed world that we live in today, not every change is clouded. Huge surprise. So, that's a part of the challenge that we deal with every day. And so, we're dealing with dozens, if not hundreds, of projects at any given moment that are running through our pre-construction group. trying to keep up with all the changes that are happening is a critical thing. And so, that's not 3D quantification per se, but just knowing where to look is a really great start. Then you jump into the quantification. So what makes it, I think the power of it today is that it allows us to sort and filter the model down really quickly. So you have some standard ways that we can sort and filter that data and look at it. If you just want to understand by level or by CSI division or by uniformat division or by scope, we've built in some ways that we can start to go through and align that data. And key to that, and this is really credit to your team, Mike, is that the whole game changer, I think, in terms of DESTINI Estimator is beyond its ability to be a fantastic estimating platform. To you, buddy. Beyond that is that it's kind of design team agnostic. And what I mean by that is we don't have to have one-for-one on the way that things are coded or the metadata that's supporting the models that we're getting. We can say that this is that. And so we can assign doors that may not fit into the box just right, but we can make them work. And that, I think, is game-changing in terms of being able to use an estimating platform for 3D quantification. And I think the last part of this is 2D is great, and you see a lot of things in 2D that you don't see in 3D, especially notes. But the thing that you see in models that you don't see in 2D is the vertical aspect of things. You have the ability to get perspective on what's going on in the model and what's going on in that construction set. And so really it takes both the 2D and the 3D elements working together, and you can leverage them both wherever is most appropriate. I think that is a very powerful element of this. So very long-winded answer. Sorry.
No, that was fantastic. I mean, there's so much to it, right? And even taken away from our tool, there are a lot of other tools out there that do a great job with 3D quantity takeoff and working with models and just getting data out of models. And I think to your point, it's definitely the quantities are there, but there's more stuff than just the quantities. And I think being able to communicate that scope and understand what you're looking at is huge. And then the fact that you can do it just immediately without having to have any legwork to actually draw, and resketch all the drawings, it's kind of a no-brainer to save time and effort. So that's huge, man. Heck yeah.
Well, these are early days. I mean, I think a lot of people think that you just click a button and voila, you have 3D quantity survey. It's not that way. You still got to really dig into the details, read the specs, read the performance spec, depending on where you're at in that process. And so whatever we could use to kind of expedite that process. I mean, if you have the right way to filter and sort the data, if you have an understanding of what it is that you're trying to quantify, it is a database. And so you can, summarize or quantify those things a lot quicker once you know what your expectations are. But that, again, is you got to start somewhere. And that process will get better over time. We're still not perfect at it, and we can't, do it on every single thing that we want. But we're starting. And I think that's, an important aspect of this is that some projects were more successful than others. And it depends on the people. It depends on how comfortable they are with, the software change. I mean, keeping in mind, we're still new to our new estimating platform. We've only been in it for about a year and a half. So we're making, changes to our database. We rebuilt our entire database, and there are things in there that we did that, we felt like 95% sure were right. And they were, pretty spot on, but we're still making tweaks and making things better. And I think that will continue for a while. And we're not there in terms of where we want to be entirely. But if we didn't start when we did, we would be farther behind. So I think that's the key to all of it, is just getting started.
See, that's a pretty powerful thing that you just said there too, especially for those people out there. I would look at you and your team as somebody who has got it more figured out than most. But just to hear you say, hey, look, we haven't got it all figured out. I think that's a big message to everybody else, is that you don't have to have the whole thing figured out, soup to nuts to get started. And just getting in there a little bit and doing something, knowing that it's not going to necessarily work exactly right, is probably the best thing that you can do, instead of waiting until something comes along that makes you 100% confident that you can do everything you ever wanted to do. Otherwise, you're never going to be pushing that envelope. And, probably to your point too, and because I know you a little bit better, I bet if we did this interview about 10 years from now, you're probably saying the exact same thing. It's just that your sights have been set on some new goal, and there's always this new promised land out there for what we can do in our industry. So we're probably never going to feel like we've got it all figured out, but I definitely think it's those companies that are going to say, hey, regardless, I'm going to get out there and try it, and I'm going to screw up and I'm going to try it again. I think those are the ones that are going to be the most successful.
For sure. Well, and it all starts with, getting your house in order. We were chatting a little bit earlier about, where different folks are coming from and kind of the perspective. It's not just the software, it's the people, it's the process. If you don't have a great process to begin with, or if you don't have a good database, or good assemblies, some companies don't have any assemblies. Some folks are still just using straight up worksheets to do this. And so it all depends on where you're starting from. One of the things that we had to do was go through and completely rebuild our database. We just wanted to take a fresh look at it and do complete rework of everything. Probably didn't want to do that, I shouldn't specify, but we realized it was the best thing to do. And so if we were going to do it, we wanted to do it right. And we dedicated the time and the resources to do it. It didn't happen overnight, and we worked on it for, I don't know, close to a year at least. Once we, got on board with the software and all that. And this is, again, the power of working with a vendor like yourself is, we wanted to make sure we partnered with people that understood what we were wanting to do, understood the importance of how BIM was going to impact our process. And so we took that aspect to it, that if we're going to build an assembly, how can we make sure that we're leveraging a model to gain whatever quantities we can out of it. And as we go through and we make changes to that process or to that model, that we can update those assemblies and those line items. So, the change management piece is not just seeing what changed, it's being able to update the estimate throughout that process too. But again, it's not just one thing or the other. It all has to tie together. And so that's where you got to really stand back and look at the technology, the people, the processes, the standards, to make sure that we're all working in a similar fashion. It's not going to be exactly the same, but it needs to be pretty close. Otherwise, you only get out what you put in. So.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think it's definitely something to keep in mind, is that you do have to have a little bit of that bigger picture sometimes. On that note, actually, one of the other questions that we have was asking, do you use the 3D models for presentations to clients at all? Or is it primarily the quantification that you use it for? So are you doing anything other than quantifying estimates with your models?
A little bit. We do all kinds of stuff with 3D. It's the great frontier, yet leveraging models. So we use it for quantification where we can. As I mentioned, it's still early days for us in that regard. But there's a whole other world to 3D. So there's obviously BIM coordination. We work with all of our design partners, our MEPs, and the architects and structural engineers and fabricators. So we want to prefabricate as much as we can. We use the models for doing layout. So not only do we do BIM coordination, but we require it so that we can prefab and lay it out in the field. So we own control for our projects, which is another derivative of the 3D process. We use it for logistics, build plannings. It impacts our scheduling approach. And so, I've heard that phrase Hollywood BIM in the past.
Mm-hmm.
I think any BIM or any model that communicates a message that's a part of your build solution is BIM worthy. And so it may not always be Revit, it may be something else. But as long as you're communicating something, and let's be honest, with all the technology we have available today, we want it to look photorealistic. We want it to, have context. We want it to feel like, oh, I can understand where this is going to be built, how it's going to be built. I want to understand what it's going to look like from one month to the next. And so we figured out ways to communicate that. And, we don't do it for every single project. It's not necessary. But for the projects where there's a lot at stake, not that there's projects with less at stake, there's always risk. But for a lot of our bigger projects where you're talking a multi-year process, more needs to be communicated. And that impacts our schedule and impacts our cost and ultimately what our solution is going to be. So, yeah, I think whatever we can use models for, we do. And I can't imagine us doing less in the future. I think it's just going to be more and more.
Right on. And so you are showing your clients these models when you get up in front of them as a contractor.
Absolutely. In fact, so we host most of the content for our projects on the cloud. And so we give our project teams access to as much as we can. I mean, stopping short of, our back of house type stuff, pretty much everything around the documents, the models, everything. I mean, it's all out there. And we not only do we share it, but we also, everybody has skin in the game. So everybody has to post their content. We set the expectation that you keep your content up to date because it's a team environment. And we're only as strong as the last person who's updating. So if there's information missing from the model, that impacts everyone.
Right.
So it's not just in that pre-con phase, it's throughout the coordination phase and the build phase. The models need to be kept up to date because at the end of the day, that's the deliverable. That's the as-build that is going to go along with the set of keys that go to that new building. And so it's not just the building, it's the information that goes along with that building, and it all needs to hang together correctly.
Right on. Well, we've got 5 more minutes, so I've got 2 more things I want to see if I can get before. So one of them, just because you talked about time and time spent in the model, one of the questions that sort of led into one of the questions that we got, which is around how much time do you spend typically actually interrogating the model, trying to find generic objects, incorrect parameters in order to make that model useful for 3D quantity takeoff specifically?
It depends. Honestly, it always depends. If we're quantifying, a very conceptual model, we don't spend a tremendous amount of time on it. We've built some standard work breakdown structures that we can use to look at the model pretty quickly, and so we'll filter through it pretty quick. At that point, again, we're not in a product like Revit interrogating it. We're in DESTINI Estimator interrogating it. So what DESTINI can see is what we're going to quantify from a 3D perspective. Because we're using, a linked approach where we're literally assigning elements from the model and their quantity values into the estimate directly, it has to work. And so we can get different values from other software. There are some tough spots like curtain wall where it's not easy. What's the best way to get that quantity for that area of curtain wall? We can get that other ways, but at the end of the day, we really want to be able to manage the process. And so that change management process is strongly related to how closely we tie to the model. And so we don't spend a tremendous amount of time on it just because if it's conceptual, we know what we're kind of getting ourselves into. As we go through that process, that evolves obviously. The more things that we can get, we will. But as I said earlier, doors, floors, walls, windows, footings, foundations, site paving and parking, those are generally the areas that we focus on, and we kind of go from there.
Nice. Yeah, I think that helps too. It actually answered one of my other questions too around some of the pitfalls that people run into when they're doing 3D QTO. Well, hey, we've got 2 minutes left. So maybe what we can do is, you are kind of a big thinker kind of guy. You do have a big picture in your head of where you think things should go, and you're pretty passionate about that. And so I know that you got a message that you'd like to send. So maybe we can end with just for those people that are out there listening, anything you want to kind of leave with, anything you feel like would be good for just people to know who are trying to get into this or maybe trying to see what the big picture is?
Wow.
Make
Thanks
sure
for the compliment first.
Yeah.
Thanks for the compliment. And as always, I appreciate you guys inviting me on to chat with you. It's always fun to chat with you, Mike, and with the Beck Tech team. I think the big picture piece here is it's all about the data, and there's a ton of it. And how you're going to use it is up to you and your company. But if you don't stand back and look at the entire process and understand what data you're trying to use, there are metrics that are beyond quantification that we're concerned with. And we want to know how we're performing in the field. We want to understand our production and our scheduling. That all can start with a good foundation, or it can be done ad hoc. The industry's done it ad hoc for generations. We're trying to move past that, and I think that if we can start to build a good foundation where we start with the model and pair it with the 2D documents where necessary, and start to build on top of that. The quantity survey and the estimates one part, the schedule and our production plans another thing. All the prefabrication we're going to build off the top of that. It all starts with the foundation, and if the foundation is not good, the house will never stay. It's never going to stand up. So I like to say, and I know you'll laugh at this, but I want to see construction be sexy again. And what can we do to make it really sexy? If we can make the models really sing and the whole team gets benefit out of that, that is awesome. And when we're spending more time doing our job around, if I'm doing an estimate and I can focus on estimating and not spending so much time doing the 2D stuff, there's an efficiency there. The same thing with scheduling and production planning. If I can leverage that model to visualize it quicker, I can run different iterations and use some artificial intelligence to help me plan that. That's better. So what can I do to improve my process, improve my project teams? My goal in this whole thing is to elevate PARIC and elevate the industry. So whatever I can do to work with great technology vendors like yourself to figure out how we can integrate technologies together and bring real value in that regard, I think is where the key to all of this is. And so I myself am not going to be out doing estimates every day and building things every day. That's not my place. My place is to enable people through great technology and great process and help understand what they're doing. And, they know what works and what doesn't. All I have to do is listen and figure out how do I connect these things in the best way. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. It's not necessary. But there are things that are still missing in the industry and in our process. So I think that's my whole bit for today.
Awesome, man. That's awesome. Well, again, hey, thank you so much for your time today. Thanks to everybody who joined us. I really appreciate everyone. Definitely appreciate those of you out there who are trying to make a difference, trying to do something. The problems that we see in this industry. I really genuinely think that it's people like Andy, it's people like everybody who is watching and listening today that are going to make the big differences. So thank you. And you guys heard it from Andy, big thinker. We're going to make pre-construction sexy again. So thanks, guys. Thank you so much. Catch you next time.
You guys. Bye.